I will turn it over to you, Marc.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Churn. Really appreciate it. I am a big fan of Create 33, so really excited to be able to share this with the whole Create 33 community, and glad that we're going to get it recorded so that people who weren't able to make it today will be able to enjoy it in the future. I will just start by, I'm going to go ahead and actually use some slides to kind of support what I'm talking about. So I'll go ahead and start sharing my screen here right now. And let's go there. Okay, so we can see my screen, I presume?
Yep.
And okay, we should be good to go. All right, so I'll just start by introducing myself. As Jaren said, Marc Bullard, the founder of Brain Squall. The key thing for me that I think is relevant to the Create 33 community is my experience in startups. So I've been a part of 5 different startups, and all of my roles have been customer facing. So I've been in everything from product management, where I'm really working closely with customers to understand what they need and how that's going to impact our product development roadmap. I've worked in sales capacity, just good old-fashioned straight sales. I've done business development, where we were developing partnerships that we're then selling to communities. So it's kind of like channel sales, really. I've been involved in professional services of deploying solutions to customers. Tech support, that was actually my first job in the software industry, was doing tech support. And then customer success, which is, to me, like the evolution of tech support, right? To me, tech support is kind of responsive, and customer success is more proactive, which is great. I think that's where we should be. So I'm glad to see that happening. So in every one of those contexts, I was always trying to better understand my customer. And by nature, I'm a very curious person. So I think that actually really helped me be successful in those different roles, because I love learning about, like, what are you doing with our product, right? So I worked in CRM, I worked in legal tech, I worked at Microsoft, worked in project management software, several different types of solutions that we were selling. But in every case, I was always thinking to myself, you know, like, how are you using our thing to do what you're doing in the context of what you're doing? And I was frustrated with the tools available to actually achieve that, and found that there was no, like, really consistent methodology for figuring that out. So that is when I was introduced to capability mapping, which was actually developed at Microsoft. So let's go ahead and look at our agenda real quick and just talk about what we're going to do today. So first of all, why capability mapping? We'll get into that here in a moment. Then what is a capability map? We'll talk about that in detail. Then we'll look at an example of kind of a conceptual capability map. So it's like a very high level, very conceptual map. Then we'll take that and go and look at one detailed map, and then a couple other specific examples of, like, real life situations of capability maps. And then we'll take it to the next level, which is context mapping. And to me, it's like, well, you'll see in a moment that a capability map is one layer of information, and I want to add context to that. I think that's where it actually gets really rich, especially in understanding your customers. So I have QA listed at the bottom, but I really, really prefer to have a conversation. So if you any question at any time. I can see Rosalinda, like I can see your face. So if you have a question, you can raise your hand or whatever, or you can just unmute yourself and start talking. So I'm totally open for questions and would prefer that to me just talking and talking. So with that, I'll go ahead and kick it off and interrupt me if you have any questions. Okay, so why capability mapping? There are lots of reasons to do capability maps, and I've actually used them in other contexts, even beyond what we're going to talk about today. But these are 3 that I think are really valuable, and they're useful to anybody, but they're super useful to startup because you are trying to break into something new. So the first use case that I think is really valuable for capability maps is enterprise customer sales. So if you're doing selling a simple thing to a single person, then it's not that complicated, right? So I'm selling, I'm talking to one person who has one problem, and I have one solution, and I just need to show them this is a solution to your problem, and we're good. That doesn't necessarily call for a capability map. But if you're selling to an organization that has maybe lots of different people that you're talking to, and they have variety of different challenges and problems that they're facing, and you have a number of different solutions, and I don't necessarily mean that you have lots of different products. It could be that your product is multifaceted and it's addressing many of their problems. Then you have this complicated many-to-many relationship. And understanding that is super, super important in the context of sales. So the more you can show them, well, the first, you want to understand it. Then you want to show them that you understand it. And that will build trust and rapport, which will help you to be effective in sales. So that's one environment in which capability mapping is super helpful. Another one is expanding your footprint. So once you have a relationship with a customer, oftentimes your goal is to try and expand that relationship. And it could just be that maybe your product has 10 different value propositions and they're only really taking advantage of 5 of them. And so it's like, well, hey, there's still 5 more value propositions that you're missing out on. We'd love to help you get even more value, right? The more value they get, the stickier they'll be, the less churn you'll experience. And so that's another really good use case for capability mapping. The third one, we're not going to really get into too much today, but I think it is really relevant. And if you are doing the first 2, the third one will happen more easily. It'll kind of come naturally. And that is competitive analysis. So if you really get to understand your customer and you understand the world in which they're working, and you do that again and again with lots of customers, you'll develop a really good map of what's going on in the kinds of organizations that you're going after. And once you've done that, then you can say, well, how are competitors or other organizations approaching this same ecosystem? And so now you can use that ecosystem to kind of reverse look at your competitors and see what they're doing. And that can be really helpful for just competitive product analysis, but also in the context, and I've used it in the environment of M&A, where we're looking at merging with another organization and seeing where the synergies are, or we're wanting to acquire another company because they have capabilities that are beyond the capabilities that we're providing or that we're addressing with our client. And so there's opportunities for that kind of analysis. So those are 3, I think, really good reasons that are super relevant to a startup. And actually, even that third one, I would even say, if you're a startup and you're looking to get acquired, one of the most effective tools would be to go to that acquiring company and actually use the capability map to say, look, this is how you're addressing this market. Here's how we fit into that. And that's why we're so valuable to you, right? So that can be tremendously valuable. Okay, so that's why. All right, so now we're motivated to talk about it. Let's actually see what the heck it is. A capability map is...
Marc, before you continue, sorry, do you mind closing your calendar reminder that popped up?
Oh,
it's covering the middle of the presentation screen.
That is
Thank
annoying.
You.
Thank you for pointing
no
that out.
worries.
So,
Thanks.
Yeah, evidently I have a presentation on capability maps right now. Okay, so the what map. So a capability map is a what map. It's a map of what's going on. So think of it like an organizational chart of the organization of what's getting done. And what it's not is it's not a who map or a how map. So a how map is like, well, these are the different applications we're using, or this is our tech stack, if you will, or whatever. A who map is what you might think of as a traditional organizational chart, or a map of the people that are involved, and those tend to be, well, here, I'll just go to the next slide and say the reason we want to do a what map instead of the others is that a what map is similar from organization to organization. So if we look at 2 software companies, mine, which is tiny, we have 12 people, or Microsoft, which is huge and has 60,000, we both actually have a lot of similarities in what's going on. We both build products. We both have to market and sell those products. We both have to implement and deploy those products, deliver them. We have to do all the kind of overhead business of business stuff, and we have to collaborate with partners and vendors and suppliers. So all those things are actually really similar between these 2 software companies. However, what's totally different is how that gets done and who's doing it, right? In my company, there's only 12 of us, so it's not very specialized. We're all doing a lot of everything. And in fact, though, even if I look at Microsoft and I take another company that's comparably sized, and I don't know, let's say Oracle or something like that, or Adobe, another really big SaaS software company, we'll use Adobe, and we'll say between Microsoft and Adobe, how similar is the how and who? Not similar at all. It's like completely different. But what they're doing is almost the same. There's tons of similarity between the what. So the purpose, the advantage of a capability map is that we can create a uniform map and use it to look at one customer after another, and really compare apples to apples and not get confused by things like org charts where this VP is reporting to that one, and well, they have a dotted line relationship here, and they kind of have a different structure and they have different columns. At the end of the day, the capabilities are the same. So the who and the how, it's irrelevant at this point. We'll talk about context mapping at the end and how we bring the who and how back in under the structure of the what. But I think it's really valuable to do these comparisons to have a what starting point, to have that kind of framework. So, okay, so we already talked about that. All right, so here is a high-level conceptual capability map. And this is the very, very tip top, the highest level, just most basic thing that you could say almost every single business essentially has these 5 things. That every business is developing some kind of product, whether they acquire the product, whether they add value, whether they build it from scratch, whatever, they have some way of kind of putting together a product. They have to generate demand, call that marketing and sales. They have to deliver the product and support it and all of that. Then they have to manage the business of the business, so that, hire people, fire people, manage the money, manage legal, etc., and then collaborate. At the end of the day, you could say, this is a map of every business because every business has these things essentially, right? So this is interesting, but it's not that interesting because it's just so high level, it's not that valuable. So let's take it a step further. Think of a capability map as like an outline. So what we have here are the 5 key points of the outline: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And so what we're going to do next is we're going to drill into 1, we're going to drill into 2, we're going to drill into 3, and we're going to go 3 levels deep. So this is the first level. We're going to add a second and third level. So let's look at develop product. And now I'm going to say that the deeper you go into the capability map, the more you will begin to find differences based on industry, right? So if you're looking at software companies, they're going to be really similar, even to 3 levels, maybe even 4 levels. They're going to be really similar. If you're looking at a software company versus an insurance company, pretty different business. They're going to start to be a bit more different once you get into level 3 and beyond. So keep that in mind. Also, this capability map, it's not like the capability map, it's just a capability map. So it's one that I've created as an example. But for each of you, as you're looking at the businesses, the industries that you're selling into, and that you're working with and that you're supporting, your approach to a capability map is going to potentially be different. So, all right, so we have this example here, develop product. So we can take develop product and we can break that into 2 sections. We can say, well, one part of it's product management and another part's actually product development. And if we take that product management and we divide that even further, we can say, okay, there's a functional definition of like, well, what exactly is it that we're wanting to build? And then there's the documentation process of that. And then you have to prioritize, well, which of these things do we want to do? And that's good old fashioned product management right there. Okay. And then on the development side, you have different elements of development. There's developing the data component, there's the user experience, the user interface, and then there's often integration with other solutions or even integrating the UI to the data layer. You might think about that in different terms. You might call it the front end and the back end, whatever. There's lots of ways to call it, but in principle, you can see that you can kind of take this piece called product development and then break it down into these other pieces. And then if you wanted, you could break it down even further, right? So, and the further you go, the more specific you're getting to a particular industry. The other one we have here is generate demand. That can be broken down in a lot of different ways, and different companies will do it in different ways. But at the end of the day, you're doing marketing, you're generating leads, you're selling deals. And if you break that down further, it's like there's PR and there's web and there's content and there's lists and outreach and there's closing the deals and there's contracting, but still it's really going to be very similar from organization to organization, what is getting done. And so we'll just continue to kind of flesh this out. I'm not going to go into tons of detail here because this is getting really tiny. It's hard to read. But in this deliver product, we're basically saying that there's 5 subcategories. It looks like multiple rows here. It was just so wide that rather than having to be super wide and super tiny, I just cut the thing in half and put it on top of it. So the subcomponents are engagement, configuration, data migration, project management, and product support. All right, so the idea, I think, is probably pretty clear here. I don't need to kind of keep breaking it down. But the idea is that, again, if I go from one organization to another, they're going to address these things in the same way. All right, and then there's managed business, and there's collaborate. So, okay, so maybe you say, all right, Mark, that's good. So having a capability map is helpful. Not sure I see that yet, but I understand. Okay, I'll buy that, and I'm gonna go along with you for now. But this seems like a lot of work. Like, how do I even create such a thing? Like, where would I put a capability map? So I'm going to show you how I've done it in the past. First example is PowerPoint or a slides, right? I mean, I'm using Google Slides, PowerPoint, whatever deck developer you want to use. It can be a way to capture a capability map. And the example that I just showed you is exactly that, right? We took this one big piece, we broke it down into subcomponents, and so on. I don't think it's ideal, but it is certainly the way that a lot of people do this, and think about like what are the components of the business that we're selling to, and how are we going to address their needs. PowerPoint or some kind of slides presentation is a very common way to do that. Another way to do it that's also super common is spreadsheets. So this is a photograph of a spreadsheet that I took. I had created this spreadsheet years ago, and I can't find a digital copy of it. So I just took a picture of this sheet that I had printed out. And essentially what I did is I just said, okay, well, here's all these different capabilities, and they kind of roll up. And so you create a different column maybe for each level or something. So it's kind of column 1, level 1, column 2, level 2, column 3, level 3. And then you can use some numbering conventions or something to kind of keep them organized. That's doable. And then you can start to gather information related to those capabilities. So the advantage of a spreadsheet is that you can start capturing data related to each capability. And that is where we start getting into context. So that's what I like to call context mapping, because now we're taking the capability map and we're adding additional context to it. So in a spreadsheet, you can do that, right? You can say the capability is demand generation, and you can add some context like, well, at this particular company, who is responsible for demand generation? And if we want to break that down further into the sales function, you could say, at this particular company, who's responsible for sales? What application are they using to manage sales? What application are they using to manage contracts, which is a subset of sales? So you could start adding context, because in a spreadsheet, of course, you all know, you can keep adding columns and you can add more information. So the ability to add that information is super helpful, because that's where we're going with the capability map. We want to be able to not just have this generic map. It's like, okay, that's cute, but then we want to add information to it that's relevant to the conversation we're having with our customer. Who's in charge? What applications are you using? How do those applications work with each other, et cetera? And so a spreadsheet can capture that. However, a spreadsheet does a terrible job of showing the relationships of like, how are these things related to each other? So that becomes a challenge. And so to solve that, what I've done in the past is create some mind maps. So again, pictures, because I don't have these applications any longer, but these are mind maps I created in the past when I was doing some M&A work, and we were looking at a company and saying, okay, this company offers these solutions to those particular capabilities, and our company offers these other solutions, and that's why we should merge these two companies, because together we'll have a bigger footprint in our customer. And so I created some mind maps for that. And the mind maps are great at showing the relationship of that kind of hierarchy of like, well, here's all of this function, and then here's another function over here, and here's another function over here. And so you can create a heat map out of that, which is nice. You can add color, you can add dimensions, but then you don't get a lot of data. So that's kind of one of the challenges, that you have one or the other, but it's hard to put the two together. As it turns out, I did try that. So I actually was able to link the mind map that you see on the left here is in Visio, and I was able to link that to this spreadsheet, which is this green bar spreadsheet that you see. I actually had those linked. It was hard to maintain it, but it was doable. So that's how I developed my capability maps in the past. Is I'd have all the data in a spreadsheet, and then this kind of relationship in Visio, and have the two linked together. So those are some ways to capture that information. What I want to do next is actually show you 3 real capability maps, maps of real businesses, real situations, and talk about how they might get used in a sales context or implementation context or a customer success context. Before I get into that, any questions about what I'm talking about? Is it making any sense, or does it seem totally off, or any feedback?
No, it makes a lot of sense. You answered my next question, which was going to be, can we see like a real one? Because at a high level, it makes sense, but love to see how it actually looks in real life.
Cool. Excellent. All right. Thank you so much for that feedback, Rosalinda. And Richard and Tracy, I can't see your face or anything, so I'm just assuming that this is making sense. If you have any questions or feedback, please interrupt me. Okay, so what I'm going to do next then is actually show you some maps, and I'm going to do that in a different application. So bear with me for just one moment while I stop sharing and reshare. Okay, so what I want to do here is show you a very basic capability map. This is a capability map of the financial function of a small startup. So, and I actually was building this based on thinking about myself as the subject. So, so what I have here is at the center of the map, or the top of the organizational level, is this red box that says finance. So we're talking about the finance function, so we'll put that at the top. And over here on the right, you can see it's like in an outline format, so that might make it a little bit easier to understand. But so we start with finance, and we say, okay, well, at little company, what really are you doing with finance? Like, what are the needs that you have? And so I say, well, there's accounting. Okay, so I have an accounting function. And then there's budget. That's another capability that needs to get done. There's relationships, and kind of the dollars and cents as it relates to relationships. And then there's this like audit and compliance. I'm going to need to do like SOC 2 compliance at some point, and I'll need to figure that out. And that's going to that'll be a part of that kind of financial function. So, okay, so there's those 4. And if I take those 4 and break them down further, budget doesn't really need to be broken down any further. Budget's budget. It kind of is what it is. Same thing with audit and compliance. It's not a huge challenge for me. It's just something I'm going to have to figure out. Accounting's a little bit more to it. There's figuring out the balance sheet. There's having a profit and loss statement. And then, of course, for startups, cash, right? It's all about managing cash. So it's like, well, how am I doing that? And so that's kind of the level 2. And then the level 3, if I go even further, is that, okay, well, cash management, it's like, well, what is that? Well, there's the bank, right? So I'm actually looking at the bank and getting information from the bank. And then there's credit card processing. And then over here on the balance sheet, there's capital, which is a piece of that, and there's going to potentially be debt, which I might be managing with different set of processes or different set of vendors or people that I'm working with, and equity. And then with equity, of course, there's going to potentially be like managing investors, having a cap table. And so that's the way I've kind of broken down these capabilities. And none of this has any names of people on it because it's all just me, right? So small company, so it's not an org chart, but it's a chart. It's a chart of what are the different things that need to get done. Now, I actually put this together because I was talking to an organization that was looking at helping companies with a piece of this equation. And one of the things that they knew is that if they're helping companies with a piece of this, that they need to be able to understand all the other pieces. So if I have a solution that's a payroll solution, I know that my payroll solution, it may have some interaction with the bank, it may have some interaction with the P&L, it may have some interaction with audit and compliance. There's a budgeting factor. So if I have a solution that's payroll, and all I think about is payroll, and I don't care about anything else, that's not helpful, right? But if I can go into a customer and help me understand your whole financial picture, help me understand the whole ecosystem, then I can better meet their needs. And frankly, if I'm a payroll solution, there's a pretty good chance that at some point in the future, I'm going to want to expand the footprint. I'm going to want to add additional features, additional functions. And so like Xero, for instance, I don't know if they acquired Gusto or how Gusto and Xero came together, but Xero is an accounting software, and now they have Gusto as a payroll management solution. So they were doing exactly what I'm just talking about. So this is a capability map.
Mark,
yeah, go ahead.
sorry, I had a quick question. So I just want to make sure I understand. So like here, what you're showing on the finance arm. So is this, I guess the piece that it's a little unclear is this like within internally as your startup, you have your finance department and these are the capabilities or the things that need to get done, or is this specific to your product that you're selling and these are the capabilities that your product has?
It's more, okay. It's actually neither of those. So it's kind of a combination of them. So imagine I'm doing that of I'm selling software that manages, well, let's just say I'm Xero. Okay. So I'm Xero, I'm selling accounting software. And if I'm Xero and I'm selling accounting software, if I'm a salesperson for Xero, I could be really lost and just totally focused on, well, here's the features that we have, and here's what we do, and here we solve your problems, and that's okay. But what's better than that is to actually understand your customer, their bigger picture. Like, okay, so Xero is not their only solution. They have other things they also need to do. They need to have a budget. They need to manage their equity. They need to manage payroll. And those are all things that are going to have some level of touch and interacting with their accounting software. So if I'm Xero, it would behoove me to have a richer understanding of the whole landscape at my customer. And so if I'm Xero, I would create this capability map that's generic, right? This is totally generic. And I can go to customer number one and say, hey, customer number one, how are you guys managing your equity? Do you guys have a cap table solution? Which one is it? How are you using that? How are you managing payroll? What solution are you using? TriNet? Are you using Gusto? Whatever, like what other solutions there are? And you can then fill in the answers on this map across multiple customers. So as an example, we can say let's do exactly that. So for their cap table, we can say, well, what solution are you using for the cap table? And so here's cap table down here. We can type something in here. So there, I can't remember the name of what's that cap table solution that's really popular.
Carta. CARTA.
Yeah, right. Yeah. There we go. Okay. So we'll say they're using Carta. All right. Now, what I can do is that's helpful for me to know. Now, I might also want to know, well, who's in charge of Carta? Like who's who owns that, right? And let's say it's Rosa. I'm going to use you. So Rosa is in charge of Carta. All right. And now I have that information that's going to be helpful for me as I'm engaging with this customer. And now I might go to another customer. And so I can go down here and just say, create a new layer. And we'll call this startup number 3. And now I can go and ask the same question, cap table. What are they using? Maybe it's not Carta, it's Sparta. And who's in charge of that? It's Fred. Actually, Red. I like that even better. It's Red. So now I can start to gather information from customer to customer to customer, and I can look at it in an apples to apples comparison. Because typically what happens is you go to a customer and you start asking questions like, well, what systems are you using? And they give you a list of systems. Well, we're using this and this and this and this and this. Okay, cool. Who's managing all this stuff? And they give you an org chart. If you're lucky, they actually give you an org chart. If you're not lucky, they give you a list. But that's not that helpful because you don't have a context for everything. So you have a list of names and you have a list of products, but you don't know how those names and products relate to each other and how they're interacting with one another and where they kind of fit in the grand scheme. So a capability map gives you like a skeleton that you can go from one customer to another, ask the same questions and gather those information and be able to see it in a nice visual way that allows you to kind of interact and pass that information from sales to implementation and from implementation to customer success, so that knowledge, that so-called tribal knowledge, like gets passed on through the whole organization across the entire customer life cycle. So
okay,
no,
that makes sense. So is it typically with capability maps that there's already like you said, a skeleton or a template that you can go off of, and then from there you just build on top of it, as opposed to like building this whole like what you're sharing from scratch?
Yeah. So basically, to create a capability map, the way I would think about it is like, well, who am I selling to? So in this case, I'm selling to people in the financial world. So I make a capability map of financial, right? I don't care about legal. I don't care about HR because for right now, the lens I'm looking at is this. I'm not looking at sales and all those other pieces. I'm just creating a capability map of the area that's relevant to me. So if you're Microsoft, your capability map is the entire business because they sell products to the entire business. But if you're Xero, then you're just looking at finance. Just to make this more interesting, like Rosalinda, what type of business are you selling to? What kind of industry are you selling to?
Yeah, so I'm actually in we're an e-commerce company, so I don't know if this will necessarily apply, but it is really helpful. So we're selling to bars and restaurants and to distributors, large distributors. So I'm trying to think what the application is, but this is interesting. So I used to be in tech sales, but we didn't call it capability map, but we had, like, depending on the client, right, like the industry that they were in, if they were a manufacturer, like we would be able to pull up like these sorts of things of like, oh, they're in manufacturing, these are typically the functions that they have, and these are the different areas that you would want to go after. So this is super helpful. So this is nice to see.
Cool. And Richard or Ashley or Tracy or G, do any of you guys have any questions, or would you mind sharing like what kind of industry you're going after? I certainly wouldn't mind making this more relevant for you if you did. So you're all on mute right now, so if you're talking, we can't hear you. But if you have some thoughts, I'd certainly welcome them because I'd love to make it relevant. And so Rosalinda, for you, you said you are an e-commerce solution, and are you a platform where you're like a multi-sided platform, or are you selling a particular product
We're B2C, so we're selling a particular product.
Yeah.
So we sell small batch mezcales, and
Uh-huh.
so our channels. I would say it's multifaceted. So it's like direct to consumer is
Yep.
one,
Yep.
although in the back end, like we have to, because alcohol is heavily regulated, we
Yeah.
have to make sure that we comply with the 3-tier system. And then in addition to that, we're also doing like good old sales, which is talking, hitting the pavement and reaching
Yeah.
out to um, bars and restaurants.
Yeah. I don't know if this is a stretch of the capability map, but I almost wonder if I would make like a capability map of their menu, like at least
Mm-hmm.
in terms of their drinks and all, right? It's like, do they have a rich, do you say it was a Mescala that you're selling?
Mezcal, yeah, distilled agave spirit.
Yeah, yeah. So it's like, do they have a really rich set of rums, but they don't have this, or do they have a lot of tequilas, but they don't have mezcal? Like, I mean, that would potentially be interesting. I don't know if that's like kind of stretching capability map a bit, but it's that same kind of thing in a sense. So, and um, if you were selling through distributors and others, then the capability map does start to fit in, because you're looking at like, well, what's their portfolio? How does what you're selling fit into their portfolio? How does it enhance or enrich their portfolio, allow them to maybe become a doorway to get them to be able to sell other products because they lead with you? Those are all questions I would be asking and thinking about in terms of.
And then is this like, so is this capability map, is it ever used like internally just to like analyze your own
Oh yeah,
organization? Because it seems like that would be extremely helpful of like, okay, these are the areas that we should have and what are the pieces that we are missing internally.
totally. Actually, let me give you an example of that. That was my next example, so that's a great segue. So here's another example of a capability map. This is for a retail organization, right? So this is a retail store, right, where they have like multiple instances of stores. So you could say they've got a whole bunch of outlets, right? And what their business is basically can be broken down into customer fulfillment, supply chain management, corporate services, and merchandising. And so you say, okay, great. And then of those four, what are the different sub components or the sub capabilities that need to be mapped in that organization? And you can break it down to that third level. I'm sorry, this is actually just 2 levels. So that second level. And so then for each of those second levels, again, like how do you want to use this? If you're using this internally, you can use it as like a self-auditing tool, right? Like, well, what are the products we're using? How are we doing? Where are the obstacles? What are the challenges? What's the impact that they have on our business? So if I go over here to this company 2 example, we can say, well, what's the maturity level of that practice within our business? Like how mature are we at handling analytics, let's say, or inventory management? How mature is our process? And then what's the impact of that on our business? And then you can come up with a risk profile. We could say, well, if they have this level of maturity and this level of impact, then here's a risk profile. And now we can create a heat map and say, we're really not doing well with customer engagement. So, the risk profile is 9 here, right? So it's way high. That's definitely a problem. And then the other piece of context then is great. Okay, so here we have this data and we have this structure, this organization. Then the last piece of context would be, well, let's capture some notes on what do we think is going on? Like what do we think we can do about it? And so that's where the capability map, adding context, starts becoming a richer tool. Now, if I'm a consultant and I'm advising companies, I could do this from an outsider's view. If I'm a company and I'm just wanting to analyze myself, then same thing, right? I mean, it's ultimately the exact same thing. So this is a way that organizations can use a capability map as kind of an auditing tool of like, how are we doing? And there's a third piece of the equation, which is, and let me look at the time. I think we're good. So let's see what order. So I'm going to go ahead and show you like another level of context, which I think it's even richer and deeper that again, you would potentially want to use for like internal purposes. I'm seeing some chat. Do we have some questions?
Just some technical issues I'm trying to help problem solve around.
Okay. All right. Awesome. Thanks, Churn. Okay. So I'm going to do two things. One, I'm going to take the capability map to like a deeper level, and then we'll look at an even bigger, kind of more complex map. So to look at it at a deeper level, I'm going to switch back to this view here. Okay, bear with me here for just a moment. And switch. Boom, boom. Okay, so adding context capabilities. So we've already started talking about context of taking that capability map as the core so we can do an apples to apples comparison, and then adding who, how, why, when, what's the state of something? Is it doing well or badly, or is it started or finished or whatever? And whatever else, right? We can add all kinds of context to a capability map. So here's an example of how we might blow something like that out. Let's take this one piece of this deliver product, which is gather requirements. So I need to gather requirements as I'm engaging with the customer. And so what is this one function, gather requirements? What's all the who, how, what, why, where, state? Let's look at all those things as it relates to that one piece called requirements. So first of all, you can add a RACI to that, right? So probably a lot of you, if not all of you, are familiar with RACI. That stands for responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. Those are the people who are the stakeholders in that particular function. So if there's this function called gather requirements, somebody's responsible for that. Right? So we can put a name on that. Somebody's accountable for it, probably that person's boss. Somebody might be consulted on that, probably the customer, it's their requirements. And someone's informed of the outcome, and that's probably the people who are maybe developing something, probably the customer as well, etc. So that's the RACI. So that's a piece of information you might want to gather as it relates to this particular piece of the capability map. And then also each piece has inputs and outputs. So if any of you have ever touched Six Sigma or done anything with Six Sigma, you may have heard of something called a SIPOC. SIPOC is supplier, input, process, output, consumer. So for any particular thing, so this is like gather requirements, what's the supplier? Well, the supplier is going to be the customer. Could also be sales, right? Sales might be a supplier because hopefully they've done some homework on the process and they've already gathered some of the requirements and some of the things that need to get done. They should be passing that information in. What are the inputs? Well, the inputs are, we need to be able to do this, we need to be able to do that, whatever. So like those are the actual requirements, those are the inputs. The outputs is a structured document of some sort, probably some kind of a requirements document. And then who consumes that? Well, the customer consumes it, the development team consumes it, configure, if you have a configuration team, whatever, those are the consumers. So those are all pieces of information that you would want to gather related to that capability. And if you are, again, go back to zero. If I'm selling accounting software, and one of the functions is accounts payable, that's a function within accounting, then it would probably be good for me to know, as I'm going to implement zero, what's the RACI? Who's responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed? What inputs do they need to do accounts payable or receivable? And who are the consumers of that information? That's just going to all be helpful. And then lastly, what are the resources and tools that are involved in that? Again, if you're implementing zero, it's like, well, what are they using today? Well, today they're using spreadsheets, or maybe they have QuickBooks. And what other resources do they have? It may be none in that case. Maybe it's just as simple as that. But it could be more complex as well. So these are all pieces of information you would potentially want to capture as it relates to a process. And going back to your question, Rosalinda, if you are looking at yourself, if you're doing an assessment of your own selves, and you're doing a capability map of like, well, what are all the capabilities we do in our organization? And you feel like there's an area that there's some difficulties, then you might want to dig further and capture this kind of information, and think about what are the incomes and outcomes of that process, or I'm sorry, inputs and outputs of that process, and how is that causing maybe some of the difficulty that was identified at the beginning. And so that comes out of kind of my Six Sigma background and experience with working on projects like that, which I think can be tremendously helpful. And documenting that then gives you an ability to then go back later and say, okay, have we addressed that? Did we make things better? Or we know who to ask? You know, are the consumers getting what they need from this process in a timely manner? So those are all elements of, these are all data points that you can add to any element of a capability map. So if I go back and go back now to the map that we were looking at earlier, I can now show you another capability map. This is for an organization. So in the past, I sold legal technology software. So I created a map of the entire legal department at the biggest corporations in the world, right? So we were selling to Fortune 500 companies and global 100 companies that had large, complex legal organizations. So this map, unfortunately, is so big that it's kind of hard to read, but if I zoom in here a little bit, it might make it a little bit easier. At the center of the map is this purple box here that says legal department. And if we look at the legal department, we can break that down into the subcomponents: intellectual property, litigation, sales, administrative legal, legal ops, etc. And if we take the intellectual property function and break that down, we can break it into patents and standards and IP licensing and off, et cetera, et cetera. If I take the patents function and break that down, there's litigation and search and portfolio, inventions and what have you. And one of the pieces of patent management is filing. I can take filing and break that down even further into priority filing and secondary filing. Secondary filing I can break down into translation, PCTs, and PCT I can break down even further into the application and designation process. So those are all functions, just breaking it down, breaking it down, breaking it down, breaking it down. So at the end, we're actually at the 6th level, right? What's interesting though, is that I've talked to 200 different legal organizations and they all have all of these things. From a capability standpoint, it's the same. Now, who manages the intellectual property group? That could be the head of litigation. It could be their own IP head. It could be the head of patents who's also managing IP. There's lots of different ways that gets done, but somebody is in charge of that. Somebody has to get that job done. And having a capability map is really helpful. So what we did is we took this capability map and we then added these pieces down here below, right? So who's the responsible party? What applications are they using? What's their level of satisfaction with those applications? Because we had some customers that are using our application for some of the work, but not all of it. We wanted to be able to capture those kinds of things. We also wanted to know things like, well, who are their primary service providers? So like outside vendors that they're using. We had software, but we knew that the other vendors would potentially need to get access to that software, or they would be consumers of the work that we were delivering. And so there was all of that. Now I can go back and take the information that we had before, and rather than just saying responsible lead, we could also add who's accountable, who's consulted, who's informed, what are the suppliers, what are the inputs, what are the outputs, who are the consumers, what other resources are they using, tools. Now, some of these things we captured. We captured the responsible party, we captured the app, we captured some of the resources being outside resources. So we captured some of that, but we could capture all of those kind of data points related to every single one of these boxes in this capability map. So the point to kind of bring this all to a conclusion is that with a capability map, you can create a rich understanding of what's going on with your customer and the ecosystem that they're working in. That's helpful in the sales cycle, because if you really take the time to understand that ecosystem, and then demonstrate to your customer that you understand that ecosystem. Actually, those maps I showed you before, that like that Visio diagram, when I showed that to customer, some of them were blown away. They were like, wow, you know our business better than we do. Because we just knew like everything that they were doing, all the people, all the processes, all the tools that developed, that gave us a lot of credibility. So that was very helpful in the sales process. One of the biggest frustrations that companies have that I've experienced when I was COO was that the sales team and the delivery team, they're always, having frustration because someone's selling something and somebody else has to deliver it. There was poor communication between them. If you have a capability map and you're capturing what are the requirements, what are the challenges, who are the people, what are the other tools, all that stuff can be passed over to the delivery team, who's now responsible for implementing whatever you've sold. And having that is really valuable. And then there's also oftentimes difficulties between delivery and customer success, because customer success has to support it, right? And they're like, hey, what are we supporting? What integrations are there? Who is consuming the different outputs of the processes that we've developed? All that stuff's important. And so, again, the capability map can be a really powerful tool for communicating from sales to delivery to customer success through the whole life cycle of the product, or to the whole life cycle of the customer. And much more than just what are they doing with us, but like also that the context in which it exists. So, Rosalinda, I appreciate your questions and your feedback. I hope Tracy and G and Ashley, that you guys also got some value from this conversation. If you have any questions, I'd love to have them. I am part of the Create 33 community, so you can find me on Slack there too. So if you have any questions after the fact, just ping me. I understand, yeah, I think I want to be respectful of the time. It's 4:29, so I want to kind of end here on time. But any questions that come up here, I'm certainly available for a couple more minutes. Rosalinda, since I can see you, I'm just going to say, you had some valid questions. Did this all come together for you? Does it resonate?
Yeah, no, it did. Will you guys be sharing the slides? I tried to do like do a screenshot of it, but it would be helpful if you're able to share the slides. But yeah, I think for me, I know that because I'm not selling necessarily software to other companies, that might be a little tricky. However, I do think that it would be super helpful, especially as a startup and you're starting and there's like so many things thrown at you, trying to just get a lay of the land of like, okay, like this is where our organization is at, but eventually these are the areas that we're going to want to build out and that we need to think about. That's where I see the most benefit for me at this stage.
Yeah. Totally. We'll definitely, for one, I can share the slides. Jaren, you can let me know what's the easiest way to do that. Jaren, I know, is recording, so she'll be publishing the recording of this as well. So that's another way just to get access to this. And then also, Rosalinda, if you are interested, you can go to brainsquall.co and actually get a free license to BrainSquall. So it's free to start building out your own model, and probably the level of complexity that you're going to build it to would still remain within the free license, so it wouldn't cost you anything.
Oh, cool! Thanks.
Yeah, so you'd be welcome to check that out, and then you'll have my information. You can always reach out to me as well, either on Slack through Create 33, or if you sign up, then you'll be on my radar, and you'll get all kinds of information from me on how to create that. And I'd be glad to help you figure that out too, because I want to help people be successful with this capability mapping.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
You bet.
Thank you, Mark. I will follow up. If you wouldn't mind just emailing me or Slacking those slides, then I can include it in the follow-up that I will be sending around, which will include the recording.
Cool.
That would be great.
You bet. Excellent.
Thank you.
Yeah, indeed. Thank you, Tracy.
Bye.
All right. Bye-bye.